Alright, everyone, it is my honor and pleasure to be the last guy to do this. We're going to talk Monster Hunter Wilds. We're going to review it at its base level on release. It's been a little under a month. As of recording this, we haven't hit a title update yet. Probably going to be some news about the first one before this is all done and dusted with this video. And also, this isn't going to be one of my nice, big, chunky celebration and critique videos. Those take a while. This game isn't completely done. Yeah, the world one is on its way. It is being worked on. It is being worked on. I'm sorry that one's taken so long. It's been a very, very busy month. So, I beat the low rank story, I beat the high rank story, I fought everything in the game a whole bunch of times. I'm around 100 hours in, maybe like 90 hours in. I'm past Hunter rank 100, had plenty of time, listened to a lot of people's opinions on the game, their issues, what they like, what they don't like, a bunch of other reviews, and just gave myself a whole bunch of time to just play the game, enjoy the game, ruminate on the game, all that stuff, just so that I could have the best take that I can at the moment. After, a good 100 so hours, I feel like that gives you some pretty good insight into how the game actually is, right? So, at the very top, I think Monster Hunter Wilds is a pretty good video game. I think at its peaks, it is an exceptionally enjoyable Monster Hunter game. It has some design choices that I object to or think should be tweaked and fixed. There are indeed some systematic issues with how the game operates, and I think it has a particularly bad launch. I'll talk about that launch first. I'm not the biggest expert because I don't play on PC. I'm not a big PC head, but the launch is easily the most inexcusable aspect about this game. It is a poorly optimized game. It was built on an engine that was not constructed to handle a game of this magnitude. It is chock full of DRM, which makes the thing kind of chug. There's just some core optimization issues on top of all of that. The big weather effects and everything can kind of slow this game down pretty drastically. There are skills that don't operate the way they should. There's monsters who aren't coded correctly, mainly with the tempered monsters. There's stuff like a house to put endemic life in and a gathering hub, which it depends on what your read on the situation might be. It could be that they're just trying to kind of stock up the title updates to be a little bit more meaty, or there's some legitimate unfinished content that they're pushing to be in later. There is some stuff that isn't there at launch that was there in other launches, and it really kind of depends on what the developers are intending. As is, it probably should have been delayed with the optimization issues, with the internet connectivity issues, with the bug fix issues that need to go in. This is probably the single weakest launch of a Monster Hunter game. I think this game probably needed to be in the oven maybe another like 4 months or so, at the very least, I would say, to really kind of try and iron things out. We knew that there were going to be PC issues after the betas. I'm sure things are going to get tweaked and fixed and optimized. Yeah, we're going to get around to it, for sure, but the game should have launched in a better state than it is in currently, and that is far and away, I would say, the worst aspect of it by a considerable amount. The other big thing that I think warrants talking about is the structure of low rank and the railroaded story narrative that it has. So the big kind of thing that it bumps into is that the way that the story is structured is very counter to how the gameplay was marketed. So when it comes to how the gameplay was presented and how the beta presented itself with the link environments and the going out and the free hunting and the doing whatever and the endless hunting of whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really exist until the single player story is done, which, depending on how fast you're going, is probably going to be about 12 to 15 hours. I don't dislike either of the aspects of Wilds individually, but I think there is an artistic tonal clash. There were a couple of times where my friends and I wanted to just kind of stop in the middle of the story, break off, and then just go hunt for fun. And we were surprised to find that the link environments are worthless. They don't exist until high rank. We tried to link up into one and there were no monsters on the map. The free hunting borderline doesn't exist. There are options to break off and just do regular pre-planned quests for low rank, but yeah, the core marketed gameplay gimmick does not exist until the low rank story is completed. So, alright, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does it really matter that low rank kind of gets sacrificed to be turned into a story campaign? Well, there's a couple of issues, I think. Number one is a big cinematic narrative single-player campaign in a Monster Hunter game is not a new thing. They've been around since the original game. We've had stories with cutscenes with no multiplayer integration for a good long while, in Tri and in 4 and all that kind of stuff. The thing that the games before World did, and that Rise did as well, is they just cut the story off from the multiplayer. There was no integration between the two. I think that the insistence of the mainline team to have multiplayer integration in the single-player campaign has been a major issue. Worlds did it worse with the cutscene work and the dropping in and out of quests and the way that that operates, with you needing to have to individually watch cutscenes, then break off, go back to the gathering hub, rejoin another person's quest, in and out and stuff like that. At least with the link party system that Wilds has to offer, it's a lot cleaner to do the story with other people. But Worlds knew when to just kind of back off and let itself be a Monster Hunter game. Wilds is much worse with this. Wilds doesn't really communicate the opportunities that you have to just kind of break off and do grinding quests particularly well. It is always pushing you to kind of do the story. Even when the gameplay itself and the mechanics aren't programmed to push you, it always kind of feels like, yeah, you kind of just got to do, like, get through this, like, we got to go. Come on, let's finish this up. So in Worlds, low rank, yeah, no, there was the story, there was the bad multiplayer integration, there were the cutscenes and everything, but the story will back off and let you just play Monster Hunter pretty much whenever you wanted. If you watch the streams that my buddies and I did, that really wasn't the case. We spent the opening weekend that Wilds was out just trying to get through the story so that we could play the video game. And the video game after the story is really good. I don't think that the video game that the story is a part of is bad, but they're two very different games. And the first one is a cinematic story, kind of Sony-esque movie game. I know some people take that as a hyper negative. I don't particularly, I don't mind that format incredibly, but it's just not what Monster Hunter typically does. If you want to get to the typical Monster Hunter game, that's about 12 hours after you boot up the title. And I think it is too much to ask to say, yeah, if you want to get to the proper Monster Hunter game, you have to slog through 12 to 15 hours. Now, realistically, if you're really into these games, that 12 to 15 is a small percentage of what you're actually going to be playing. Like I said, I've got about 100, so that 12 to 15 is getting closer and closer to only being about 10% of my gameplay, even less than that, even less than that, even less than that as things go on, for sure. But I still think that, you know, blocking the proper hunting experience and then just kind of doing whatever you want and going out into the world behind 12 to 15 hours, I think that's too much to ask. Even if I don't think that the story mode is particularly bad in a gameplay sense, it's not fantastic. You still have the Sacreds on Rails section where you're just listening to the characters talk and, you know, maybe you don't give a crap about the story, and low rank is basically non-existent. Do I think it's heinous? No. There's a massive artistic design and gameplay divide in how this title functions that is unavoidable, unskippable, has no bypass, and is about 15 hours long, and I think that that's too much to ask. Especially considering the fact that it's regressive from other Monster Hunter games where they just cut up the story mode and they cut up the multiplayer mode. If you didn't give a crap about the single player cinematics, you just go to the multiplayer hub, you circumnavigate it completely, and you just go online and you play the game, same monsters, same everything, blah, 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 blah. And I don't find that Wilds needed to make this sacrifice. I don't think that low rank needed to completely be gutted to make this mode. I don't think that there's any reason why there shouldn't have been just a multiplayer quest line where you can go around the cinematics and avoid the story if you wanted to avoid the story, like pretty much every Monster Hunter game, barring World and now Wilds, has done. So I find that that is particularly regressive for the series. And again, the cinematic story, don't hate it, but it's not a structure that I think some people are interested in. Now, there might be the question of, okay, well, does it matter that low rank gets sacrificed? Who gives a crap about low rank, right? Low rank has always existed to be the thing that you kind of blow past to get to higher rank, which is the proper game, until the expansion comes out. So who particularly cares? there's a couple of things. One, the story mode is very easy, and low rank is usually what exists to teach you and to train you how monster gimmicks work, how item use works, how kind of armor and everything works. And yeah, no, all those tutorials are still there, and monsters still have gimmicks and whatnot, but it doesn't really give you too much opportunity to just kind of like sit and marinate and try things out. And in low rank, monsters just really don't have the health or the attack power to force you to kind of reassess strategies. It's really kind of existing for you to get through it. So the stuff that'll teach you really kind of the difficulties of Monster Hunter are much more backloaded than they used to be. The other issue is once you get into the high rank stuff, if you need any low rank parts to work on weapons or work on talismans or anything like that, you have virtually no part stockpile. You won't have any low rank materials in your inventory, barring the probably only one of everything that you had slain. So you might need to slog and go back and get some of that stuff anyway, and it never feels particularly great to have to do that. You're doing very minimal grinding except for maybe like one armor set to help you get through to the main boss and into high rank. That's probably all you're going to do. So yes, low rank is very often blown past, but it has some general importance that really just kind of gets blown off to the side. So much so that they invented the oops, we skipped low rank store with the stockpile guy, who's basically the Argosy in this game, where you can buy some monster parts off of them for some limited resource points, some of those being low rank monster stuff. And that kind of feels like the compensation store. I saw a couple of people concerned that this could be kind of like the GCP in Frontier, where you can basically just buy very, very expensive materials. I'll keep my eye on that store, but it very much kind of seems like the compensation store more than the bypass the actual playing the game store so far, but who knows. But yeah, so low rank barely exists, and I really don't feel like it needed to barely exist. And it is extremely easy. When a lot of people are talking about the difficulty of Wilds and how woefully easy it was, yeah, there's still aspects of it that do make it easy, and we'll talk about that later on, even in like the very end game parts of the title, but the health values and the attack values of monsters in the story are very, very, very low. You will probably only need to get like one armor set kind of at the mid-level, upgraded a teeny little bit, and you will be able to survive the low rank final boss, get into higher rank, and then make an armor set from there. So I find that low rank is an ineffectual teacher. It is not really preparing you for the greater game ahead. It is trying to be an enrapturing cinematic story that will take you along with its journey, hoping that you enjoy it, and then hoping that you enjoyed yourself so much that when you're in the more kind of free, open range part of Monster Hunter, that you'll then kind of stick with the game and engage with it at that level. So I find that the previous titles are better at teaching things and had bypasses that this game completely ignores entirely, and I find those design choices to be objectionable. Not objectively heinous, but I think that other Monster Hunter games communicate their information and allow for people to ignore the cinematic stuff that they may or may not care about far, far easier. And I feel that the single player mode of Wilds is enormously insistent, very intrusive, and again, I didn't dislike it, but it did rub me the wrong way. I will say though, it definitely served the purpose that it was going for. It got a lot of people to play the game as a device to bring in new people who were put off by Monster Hunter in the past, want to give it a shot, give them an enjoyable experience, hopefully get the hooks in. I think it definitely did do its job. I don't think it's a bad thing that there is some pandering to a more casual audience and trying to get more people in. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of people I saw that were not big Monster Hunter people or were kind of more casual Monster Hunter people, played Wilds, played through the story, had a blast, were really sucked in, enjoyed themselves tremendously, and stuck with the game for a good chunk of time. And that's really cool. But again, there are the people who are not here for that, and we used to have a system for those who weren't here for that, and I think it isn't right to take that away from them. So let me talk about like the actual technical writing of the narrative itself, as we're kind of still on this topic. I think the story's pretty competent. I'd really kind of have to sit and ruminate and like ultra kind of tear into it a little more to give maybe a very hardline objective stance on it, but I generally enjoy it. For the most part, I think the characters do a good chunk of work to make me appreciate the game. The plot is very, very typical. It's a monster that's causing a disturbance, and then there's a bigger, badder 11th hour boss that's like the actual disturbance, all that kind of stuff. And you go around, running around, fighting a whole bunch of monsters that are scared and worked up to a frenzy due to the goings-on of the bigger, badder bosses. Very Monster Hunter story, very typical plot. We'll talk about where the plot exactly goes a little bit later, but the characters, I think, do some pretty good work. These are definitely the better characters in Monster Hunter as a whole, and I like the bulk of the cast. It's a pretty large cast with some strong core characters and then some side characters that I generally enjoyed. I liked Alma as a partner. She felt like a very just kind of complete person. She's a generally very caring, kind of soft-spoken, thoughtful individual, but she's got moments of comedy, she's got moments of hesitancy, of worry, of professionalism, she's got little hobbies with archaeology, she is a very professional individual, she's a very caring individual, nothing like super crazy, nothing super in-depth, but yeah, she's a very likable person, a complete person, good range of emotion, she's a good partner to have. I like having her around, helping out and giving useful information and being kind of this guild representative to give me permission to go out and take care of the environment, gathers intel for me. She's a cool character. I like Gemma quite a bit. You know, she's the memed pretty girl character, but you know, she gets plenty of her own stuff. She is the more kind of fiery type character, the more very kind of excitable one. She's a character from Monster Hunter 4, but they didn't really kind of make a big deal out of it. They had some instances in the story with Azuz that she can connect with her childhood, but again, they don't make like a major deal out of it or anything. She has some relation to the plights of the people in that town. She's just kind of the good wingman, very likable character. The people over in the Astrum unit I really like. Olivia's a very kind of typical hero character, is a really cool combat partner who teams up with you in a whole bunch of other missions, but, you know, isn't some kind of like brash, arrogant, intrusive individual. She's just cool. She's just a bro. She's awesome. I kind of like the Eric character. Very feminine voice acting, which is a little goofy, but he's this very excitable dude who is super into the natural world, very excitable by it, and he actually kind of has a little bit of a fix of what some people have an issue with the original handler from World, where gets overexcited, he gets snagged up by a Lalabarina, gets paralyzed, we gotta save him, and then, you know, from those moments past, he kind of has a little bit of self-awareness and self-preservation, and he's still a very excitable person with a lot of theories, and he's usually the kind of character who will exposit what's going on with the environments, but after that one incident, he kind of knows a little bit better to just stick back and let the actual warriors handle things, and that's pretty cool of him. Then there's the Werner character. He's a potentially pretty interesting dude who I wish they did more with, where he's a very one-track minded, hyper-fixated individual. He has a line of dialogue where he's like, you have to be very overt with me because I don't think I did anything wrong, when he was kind of delving into how the fire spring works, and that kind of triggers the issues with the Ajarakan and New Udra showing up. But he's like, I was just trying to help an issue, like an engineering issue. I figured out how the engineering issue worked and I fixed it. Like, I don't really, I did what I was supposed to do and you did what you were supposed to do. So what's the issue? And you kind of like get through to him that there's other stuff to consider. And that's potentially really interesting. I think he's probably, in terms of like pure concept, the most interesting character in the narrative on that front, but they don't really kind of do too much with him beyond that story bit. But I find that that's an interesting bit of characterization. And then there's a whole bunch of villagers and the issues that they have and their ways of interacting with the natural world. They're all perfectly likable. And then there's the Nata character, who's probably the big contentious one for most people, because he's the major character, not so much your hunter, not the rest of the people in your unit, but it's this kid who is chased out of his village by the emergence of Arkveld, gets picked up by the guild, and goes on his whole story. So there is a lot of debate and a lot of jokes made at his expense over his relation to Arkveld and his journey and his narrative. And a lot of people were kind of nervous about his character too, because he's the emotional, naive kid that kind of crashes out. There's a bit in one of the trailers where he's yelling about like, you're not gonna kill the Arkveld even though he blew up my village. Give me your weapon and I'll go fight him even though I'm a child. And like, shut up, kid. You're an idiot. So looking at his actual progression and what he does in the story and what he's presented with when he's picked up by the guild and he's out going on on the adventures with you. The reason they bring him along is because they need him for identification. That's kind of one issue with the story, is they probably should have this child out in the wilderness a lot less than he actually is, but we need him for identification that the White Wraith is out there. But as he's going along and he's out there with you, and he's out of this secluded village that he was born in with the Keepers, he is the POV character through which the workings of the natural world are explored, how the relations between animals and their environments work, how these human beings from the Kunafa village to Azuz to the Woodwoods and all that, how they humbly live as a part of the natural world and work in harmony with it, don't try to dominate it or anything like that, but just ingratiate themselves as a part of it. They actually kind of make the food porn of the game a plot point where he's going around and trying the foods of different cultures and enjoying it and just kind of gaining this wider appreciation of life and of living and of the freedom of it and the will of it and the natural order of things, which that is what is imparted into him as a part of the story. And then once the truth is revealed about how Arkveld works, how it is a man-made organism, how it was bound into a specific duty by his ancestors, he feels very guilty of that because that was his bloodline. His legacy is creating these abominations, railroading them into being a very specific type of creature, not allowing them to be free. And then through the process of the game and Arkveld's own properties and his own willpower, he's able to kind of gain his own freedom and start to live for himself. And this is the big contention moment, is that Nata relates to that as Arkveld is going on a massacre, basically, of the other Guardian monsters and has become basically so high on life that it has been driven mad by its own hunger and its own desire to live that it is becoming a danger. And they make a contrast with it of the food that you are partaking in from these different cultures, and then they kind of hard cut to Arkveld, who is brutally gorging on these other Guardian Sacreds to just eat for the sake of eating and kill for the sake of killing just because it's alive and it can. It's so high on that. And the mixture of appreciation for life, of the appreciation of freedom, the appreciation of breaking free of a design, and guilt over what his ancestors did is the reason that Nata empathizes with the Guardian Arkveld and doesn't want it to die and doesn't want it to be put down. So, and Nata's wrong, right? So if you're gonna do the emotional, naive character who is clearly in the wrong about something for a reason like that, that's something that's very tricky to do, because you, the audience who has the hindsight and doesn't have that kind of emotional connection, will know that the character is doing something emotional and stupid and illogical and irrational. Now, there's an argument to be made that, yeah, Arkveld might have been probably too apparently violent to really kind of draw this connection, but from the points that I've brought up, I feel like it is rational to see why someone would empathize and would sympathize and feel bad for this creature, as he is just a pure victim, really. And especially because of the familial connection that Nata has to the existence of this animal in the first place. So there are parallels to be drawn. There are relations between the two. If you're going to do the story trope where a character has that kind of emotional, illogical type of reaction to it, not only do you need to have the groundwork for that emotional, illogical thing to occur, which I think the game provides, but the narrative itself needs to recognize that this character is being emotional and irrational, which the game, I believe, also does, because you have Alma and you have the Hunter, who are the more experienced adults in the room, who recognize the tragedy behind the Guardian Arkveld, but at the same time are realistic individuals who know that the thing has to be put down and go about it despite the protests from Nata and put the Guardian Arkveld down. So the narrative understands that this is an emotional, irrational crash out and treats it like that, which I think is the difference between a good writing of this trope and bad writing of this trope. The other thing is then Nata is given the ability to rectify this and grow from it. So once it is revealed that the Arkveld population has recuperated and that there are now naturally reoccurring Arkvelds, they do a plot point where one of them has become this aberrant, erratic individual who has been contaminated by strands of the Frenzy virus, complements of Gormagala, and is again another incarnation of Arkveld that is running amok and is going crazy, and they kind of represent the issue to Nata, and he is now wiser, able to make that differentiation and to see the pragmatic need to put down a threat to the environment. So they give him groundwork for that irrational decision. The story knows it's irrational. There are other characters who are more knowledgeable that treat it the way it should be treated, and then they give the character the ability to change. So I don't find him to be a poorly written character at all, and that's why I generally like the narrative around him. So then plot-wise, let's actually talk about the Guardians themselves, because it's well, the story of Monster Hunter Wilds is kind of goes a little something like this.
Where'd you get these?
I went to a scientist and had them genetically engineered. Fly, beautiful turtle doves. Bring Christmas cheer to all. Everybody outside! We'll do the rest of Christmas outside! Go, go, go!
So opinion-wise from me, right? Does this bother me that we have man-created monsters and that we're harkening back to the equal dragon weapon from concept art books? Well, I'll tell you to it like this. This is a franchise that has had a potentially actually malicious, evil ancient dragon. It has hyper turbo zombie rabies. It's got sapient telepath storm dragons that can grasp the concept of royalty. It's got magic portals to other dimensions with other franchises in it. It's got praying mantises with mech engineering degrees. Am I going to draw the line at GMOs? No, I'm not. The biggest contention, I think, with this, as opposed to some of the other crazy stuff that Monster Hunter has done with its narrative, is that the Guardian concept is far more sci-fi, and most of the other crazy stuff that Monster Hunter has done has been natural process. So there is this kind of level of non-human control to it, like the whims of nature, that yeah, you kind of just have to accept that this is a by-process of the way the natural world worked, and something made it so that this had to evolve this way. It is what it is. When you get to man-made creatures in a more kind of sci-fi concept, there is a burden of understanding and explanation because it's something that humans had to have understood and be able to create. So I think there is a kind of narrative burden of mechanical understanding because the characters that existed in this universe have to have that understanding for this to function. Both of these really crazy out there concepts for Monster Hunter are rooted in some form of logic, but one of them has that heavier burden of needing explanation. But yeah, in terms of actual on paper craziness, do the Guardians bother me? Not really. No, this is a goofy franchise with a lot of goofy stuff, and I think on paper there's concepts that I just listed that are technically crazier and stupider than artificial monsters. The major issue, I think, really kind of exists in the progression of Arkveld and how it transfers from one of these pre-programmed individuals into a more organic and free-thinking creature. The groundwork for it to be able to do this is enormously shaky at best. It is established with the Guardians, with the first ones that you take down, that their esophagus and their stomachs have atrophied, that their reproductive organs have been removed. So a lot of these driving instinctual aspects of an animal to distract them from being weapons have been taken out. So by some process, by sheer willpower, the Guardian Arkveld is able to kind of overcome these changes and these modifications to its body to be able to eat and to be able to reproduce. It might have something to do with the fact that he has elemental absorption abilities. I don't remember if they blatantly said whether or not that was allowing him to reconstitute himself specifically. If I'm right or wrong about that, you can let me know. But they kind of just leave it up to a pure willpower type of ordeal, and that's really shaky. Again, if I'm missing a detail here or there where they really kind of explained it, feel free to correct me on that, but I do feel like the groundwork for Arkveld to actually become free was not well explained, if it was explained at all. I think it might have something to do with the fact that he's ripping these elemental energies off of these other monsters, and it's kind of like a healing process. He's basically kind of reconstituting himself, but I don't know if that was overtly said, so I'll leave that to my comment section to correct me. If there is, I still think it's shaky for sure. I don't think they ever really overtly say that Arkveld has regenerative capabilities to him. And that kind of also has to be how the Guardian Arkveld gives birth, is that it somehow reconstituted its ability to repopulate, and at that you then have to make the assumption that it is a creature that is capable of asexual reproduction, which isn't overtly stated. So I like the thematics, I really do. I like what it's trying to say. I like how it's trying to connect to the major character of the story. The mechanisms, I think, are particularly weak, unfortunately. It's very much kind of going on like a Jurassic Park type of logic, where the will to survive, the animal instinct, the need of a species to propagate itself and continue to surviving has allowed this Arkveld to do things that it normally shouldn't be able to do out of a pure desire to keep the species alive. It's Jurassic Park, where the girl dinosaurs in Jurassic Park grow penises and are able to repopulate because they got that frog in them, you know? You know what? If it's good enough for like an all-time top 100 greatest film of all time, it might be good enough for Monster Hunter. But I think the explanations of how that all works in that movie are, at least I think the groundwork is a little bit more solid, because Arkveld has to like regrow major organs in its body for this story to work, which if it can, then it can, but it's not explained well. But again, thematically, I think it is pretty neat. And Zoshia, I think, as the final story boss, I think is kind of neat. As this, first of all, it is a reconstruction of the equal dragon weapon from old Monster Hunter art concept books that people on Reddit screamed about being non-canon due to there being mistranslations and misinformation for a very long time in the fandom. And I think it's very, very funny that Capcom said, all right, we're going to make this thing canon. We're going to reinterpret it into a proper monster. You can even tell that this is supposed to be a reinterpretation of the EDW because they took that thing's head and made it into Guardian Arkveld's helmet. So then Zoshia might be another thing that's particularly contentious, because it really depends on how powerful they're going to allow the ancient civilization of Ardians to be, because Zoshia is very blatantly supposed to be this hybridized chimera of the most powerful dragons in the world. It's got abilities from the entire Fatalis Trinity, it's got powers from Elatrion, from Geismagorn, from Shara Ishvalda, from Safi Jiva, some of like the biggest, baddest, most powerful dragons to ever walk the earth. And it's got this mismatch of abilities of all of them. So it's really going to depend for me of whether or not Zoshia is really cool or really lame on how they decide how he was constructed. If the ancient civilization was so powerful that they slew and took down every single super powerful monster that ever existed and blended it all into this hyper crazy chimera thing, I think that's really lame. I don't like it if a story massively disrespectfully downplays very cool and very powerful aspects of its canon in order to hype up a new thing. If it's kind of the other way around, which I think is probably what they're actually doing, in that the Ardians took a lot of inspiration from these dragons, had knowledge of them, were able to garner a couple of little scraps and pieces and tidbits here and there to try and make their thing, that I think is considerably more acceptable, honestly, because that I think actually kind of fits into what the narrative and the thematics are trying to do a little bit better, where they're trying to say that humility before the natural order is what humanity should try to go for, that these people who thought they were gods were arrogant, were false, were wrong, were wrought low by their own creations. And I think it would be more thematically profound if this ultimate super hybrid chimera in Zoshia is, as impressive as it is honestly nothing compared to the actual godlike monsters that it is trying to be an imitation of. I think that would be much more thematically resonant, and you can tell that when you look at Zoshia, it's malformed, it's cobbled together, hobbled together, it is inhuman, smashed together, bits and bobs and weird pieces here and there, incredibly incomplete looking and very slapdash together. So I hope that's what they're going for, and it's not too try hard. If they go too try hard with it, then my opinion of Zoshia would definitely diminish. But if they're kind of going for the point that, yeah, it is a pale imitation, yeah, it is kind of pathetic, I think that's actually more interesting than it being the coolest, biggest, baddest, most powerful thing ever. And the other thing I want to talk about the narrative is that the hunter actually talks, which is something I brought up when I reviewed Rise, is I hate it when there is a silent protagonist in a story that shouldn't have a silent protagonist. There's some games where it works, there's some games that it doesn't. It really, really bugged me in Rise because your character was supposed to have personal attachments to the characters in Komodo Village and all that. So thank God your character talks. Now, he's not a super fascinating and in-depth character. There's still a lot of room for you to do some fill-in-the-blanks and kind of background storytelling with your character. There's a little bit of illusion here and there that this character has a backstory, but they're never really going to go into it. So they kind of meet you in the middle, where you're allowed to actually be a character that interacts and talks and has normal human interactions with other people. Thank you, God. But at the same time, is a particularly blank individual, kind of for the most part, that you can still kind of self-insert into. For the major story, that's mostly what your character is just a very kind of typical heroic individual. Where I actually think that the hunter character shines is in the post-story optional quests. So not in the actual major narrative where there's a lot of character-driven work, but when the hunter is actually just kind of allowed to do his job, I think that's actually some pretty cool writing. So I actually really like the subquests in this game because what they do is they show you what a hunter is actually supposed to be doing, right? There's a joke in Monster Hunter where we're basically eco-terrorists. We just slaughter animals by the hundreds and turn them into armor. The whole Warden of Nature thing is a whole bunch of crap, right? That's the joke, because the gameplay does not match up with what the canonical hunting is supposed to be. With the story, and even more so, I think, with the optional quests, you actually kind of get the ability to see what hunters are really supposed to be doing, because you'll go and you'll get these descriptions from these people. It's like, we're trying to mine out in this area, we're trying to gather crops out in this area, we're trying to tend to livestock out here, but this thing is showing up, but like this monster shows up, we don't know what it is, because like they make a point of the fact that the natives of these lands don't really know the monsters particularly well. They're just these leviathans out in the wilderness that they're terrified of. But the hunter knows from the base information he's given, is like, okay, that sounds like this monster, he reacts to this type of thing, if you want to be safe around it, you got to do this, here's how you can kind of change your behavior to kind of give it its space and give it its respect. Try not to sink into this bad habit, because if you leave this material out there, then that's going to attract Gravios to show up to kind of munch on the ores that you're kind of leaving around. Just give them their space within this territory. And it allows the hunter to be a character to have knowledge on the animals, to know how to deal with the animals, to route the ones that are particularly dangerous, and then give the natives advice that they need to make it so that these issues don't happen again. He's trying to put these villagers in situations where they're not going to need him, so he doesn't need to go and actually do his job. The writing treats the hunter like he is an emergency, last-ditch effort that people need to have on hand if something goes really, really bad. And I think that is really cool writing for Monster Hunter, and it made me feel the most like what I always kind of imagined the operations of the guild were supposed to be, is you have these people who are trying to live their lives, they're in danger, they don't understand this big crazy animal out there. You have a very knowledgeable individual who can intervene and then give the insights and the wisdom to prevent this issue from happening again. That, I think, was legitimately really cool, and one of my favorite parts of the narrative of this game, actually, honestly. I thought that was some really cool stuff. So those are my takes on the mechanical structuring and the actual writing of the narrative. This took a particularly long chunk of time because I find that this is a really major and important part of Monster Hunter Wilds. So now we're going to talk about kind of the more general, you're actually playing the video game, what are you going to be doing, mostly in high rank. Let me talk about the core gimmicks of Wilds first, because I think this is the other probably major point of contention with Wilds, and it is wounds and it's focus mode. And then also kind of like the offsets and the perfect guards and perfect evades and everything, but I think those are far less of an issue. I'll touch on them very briefly. The perfect guards, the perfect evades, the power clashes and the offsets and stuff like that, it is a bit of a evolution of the very counter-heavy wirebug system that Rise and Sunbreak brought to the table, but I think executed far better. The timings feel a lot more skill-based. They feel more satisfying to pull off. They're a little bit more difficult to pull off. The different weapons, instead of just hitting a button and then you get like a free counterattack into big damage, and you get to pull those, rip those off one by one, they just kind of naturally weave these perfect interactions into the game a lot less intrusively. There's a lot of inspiration taken from Adept style from Monster Hunter Generations, with the dual blades having a perfect dodge system to them. The longsword is still very counter-oriented. Every weapon that has a shield has a perfect block. You have perfect blocks in GU. You can get these really cinematic power clashes off of those, but they're not spammable. Some of the big heavy weapons have these offset counters that can knock a monster down, but they're not guaranteed to get a knockdown on them. They have some build up to them, so you can't just spam offsets and pin a monster down over and over again. I like the system quite a bit. I think it teaches good timing. I think it teaches good knowledge of the kit, of the monster, and of your weapon. I think they're very engaging. They're very fun. The big mega heavy counter hits that you get off of them aren't particularly spammable. I think they are generally one of the more fun aspects of this game. Focus mode and the wounds, though, are much more contentious. I made a video about focus mode. I like focus mode at kind of face value as a concept, and I talked about why in that video. The major thing I enjoy about focus mode is what it does for the kits of the monster and the kits of the weapons, kind of. These feel like the most intelligent monsters in Monster Hunter with what they're able to do. They have some delays on their attacks, they have some weird windups that you gotta learn, they have cross-ups, they're trying to get past you and around you and strike you from behind, they're trying to flank you, they're trying to box you out, they fly around you a lot more, their combos come at you from different angles and whatnot, they have a lot of kinetic energy to them. They're doing a really good job of trying to get past your defenses and fake you out and deceive you and to trick you and to just pick you apart from the sides or from behind, use different projectile patterns to kind of force you to overcommit to something that wasn't meant to hit you so that you're going to get struck by something that wasn't. And I think that's really cool in teaching, again, pattern recognition and knowing where the combos are. I think that generally has done a lot of good for the kits of to the wire bugs in Rise. I think that the monsters are programmed in such a way to deal with your enhanced movement and precision and control very well. They have been allowed to compensate for that range of motion that you now have access to, and the result of that is Wilds probably has some of the most carnal, bloody, rough and tumble, knockdown, drag out, bruiser feeling, visceral fights that Monster Hunter has to offer. You feel very quick and very reactive and also very kind of meaty and chunky and strong, and the monsters feel smart and they feel deceptive and they feel clever and they also feel very chunky and very straw. Everything just feels nice and visceral, and it feels like two very intelligent, very reactive opponents that can clash against each other, and I think that is a major highlight in how fun the gameplay is. The core issue comes down to the wounds, and more so than that, the focus mode attacks that close the wounds. The wounds are supposed to be an innovation on the Clutch Claw from Iceborne, where the developers want you to kind of have this dynamic system where where you are creating weak points on the monster's body that deal more damage. You're pursuing them, you're trying to open these up, and then use these naturally generated scars and weak points to do additional damage. It creates this kind of narrative to the fight. It gives you like a bit of a mini game to chase. It gives you kind of just like this little extra task. It gives you this brief window to gain more damage if you're really persistent with it. And, you know, it scars up the monster, it tears them up, it litters them with just wounds and injuries all over their body and that kind of stuff. That dynamic I generally really enjoy. I think it is more interesting than hopping onto a monster and then just doing an attack and then coating their entire body in this kind of cracked white gray texture that makes them look really ugly. It's also kind of ugly with the scarring, but it feels a lot more natural than just like the white cut up tear thing that they have with the tenderizing. And it's also kind of a play on the anomaly popping that you have with the afflicted quests in Sunbreak, where you basically have these little mini games that you're trying to track all over the body of the monster to try and pop them for bigger damage. That I think is all generally fine, honestly. It's the focus attacks. The focus attacks, I think, are probably the biggest singular gameplay issue in Monster Hunter because of how they need to function. What they do is if you want to close a wound immediately, you go into focus mode, you press R1, your hunter will do an attack, you go for it. 8 to 9 times out of 10, what that's going to do is it's going to automatically flinch the monster out of whatever animation they're doing, barring a couple. It will lock them down so that you can do the focus mode attack to close the wound. And then wound closers do a lot of damage of their own merit and are also very good at closing other wounds. So in doing these attacks, you're very likely to get another flinch or a full knockdown. So this is simple, but it's very, very, very powerful and has a lot of utility. If you are playing in such a way that you are micromanaging these wounds, what you can do is effectively, a monster's trying to do an attack, you lock them out of that attack, you might get a free knockdown, you just push them down to the ground, pile drive them there, keep attacking, go to a spot where they haven't been hit, open up another wound, because wounds are not difficult to open up in this game. Then you have another one open, the monster stands up, they go for an attack, you go for that closer, free flinch them out of that one, knock them down again, and if you're running something like a sleep or a paralysis, you're getting proc buildup on those all the time, and those are particularly generous as well in this game, which we'll talk about. So if you know what you're doing, the ability to flinch, knockdown, wound open, flinch, knockdown, paralysis, flinch, knockdown, stun, knockdown, flinch, over and over and over into pure and utter trivialization is the easiest it has ever been in Monster Hunter. Now, again, pretty much every Monster Hunter has the ability to speedrun, yes, and every Monster Hunter has something that you can exploit to cheese the monsters. Yes, 100% absolutely. This is far and away the easiest. And it is made even worse by the fact that the game will sometimes bend over backwards to allow you to get these closers. If a monster's body is narrow enough, you can get a closer on a body part that's on the opposite side of the body. Sometimes it will kind of like drag your weapon a little bit closer towards a wound if you do an attack to really kind of nab it. There are some times where the game really kind of just gives you those closers for free, basically. I understand why they work the way that they do, because generally the game wants you to actually get the wound closing animation on the monster. So if it doesn't lock you down, what's going to happen is you're just going to strike at the air with the wound closer and nothing is going to happen. Or you're just going to get it for free out of nowhere, which also happens in the game if the monster doesn't get staggered, is you might just complete the animation and get the closer in the middle of the air. So sometimes the game just magically gives you these stuns completely for free, and it feels like cheating. And again, if you want to micromanage it, you can just trivialize monsters into oblivion. And even if you're not super good at the game, these are still the easiest monsters to trivialize that I think that they have ever made, for the most part. That's the number one issue. And this is probably why I think a fair amount of people who are fans of these games, for the challenge that they potentially present, are less than impressed with Wilds. That and the bad launch is probably the two major things I have heard for those people who are particularly put off by this title. And I do think that's a perfectly valid issue and complaint to have with this game. As much as I am not someone who comes to Monster Hunter strictly for the challenge, I do believe that this mechanic specifically is too generous, has too much utility, is too simple, is too powerful, is too easy to loop for its own good. And I think that stinks, because I'm hoping that the lesson isn't we gotta toss out wounds completely and we gotta toss out focus completely. Both of those mechanics, I think, are generally pretty good. These closers are the biggest issue in the game at the moment. What I think the developers should probably do, and I think they also need to do this with statuses and stun, they need to add build up to how these things are generated. And specifically with the wounds, I think the build up should probably be pretty drastic. I am of the opinion that if you are running max level flare, it should be a struggle and an issue to get every singular wound on the body of a monster. I almost want it to be that drastic, that like if you want to get every single wound that a monster has to offer, you're going to want to max out flare. And then if someone's like really good, it might be less of an issue. Your first wound very easily, but then you kind of go for the second one, it takes a lot more time. You go for that third one, it's a lot more time. And basically, even if you have to get those magic magnetism, lock attacks, and knock things down, at the very least what's going to happen is you can't just get another free wound to exploit off of every single knockdown, is basically what I think needs to happen. And something quite similar I think should probably happen with things like stun, paralysis, sleep, and status in general. This I think can be particularly less drastic because I find that this is probably the most useful statuses I've felt in a very long time, and I find that statuses are the most fun that they've been in a very long time, especially after 5th generation, where statuses felt miserably unusable minus blast and sometimes poison with specific builds, and the weapons that weren't supposed to be the big KO weapons were the only weapons where you could actually get KOs. Like hammer and hunting horn as a KO weapon felt borderline worthless in some of the 5th gen games. And this one they feel much better. Do they need some better build up? Yeah, for sure. I've done a couple of fights where chain sleeping some of the apex monsters is particularly easy to do. I don't think it needs to be nearly as drastic as I think the retooling that you need to do with the wound build up, but a little bit more, because the wounds are really powerful with their utility, and status is really powerful with its utility. A particularly good player is going to make it so that a monster's not going to be able to throw it out and attack. So yeah, keep statuses feeling fun and feeling usable and having some utility on them, but give them some decent ramp up, I think. And then wounds, I think you're not going to be able to take them out of the game. You're not going to be able to take the focus attacks out of the game, but I think the game would be healthier if you nerfed their ability to be built up to into the ground, basically. I think you have free reign to be drastic with how much you change that. Some other stuff I'm not super fond of. I don't love how they changed decorations. I like the 5th generation style better. They changed things around in 6th generation where there's skills that you put on weapons and there's skills that you put on armor. I know why they did this. Its purpose is to be there for you to have 2 different weapons on your kit with the sacred, and then basically if you want to swap over weapons, you still have your armor skills retained, but then your weapon has a different collection of skills on it, so you don't have to worry about having your armor have like focus and crit draw and punishing draw and all that stuff, but your second weapon's like a dual blades or something like that. So they have some very important weapon dependent skills placed on your weapons, and they can't go on your armor, and they also have some very major damage skills placed on your armor and not your weapons, and that's a pretty considerable issue sometimes, where you really need a particular non-damage skill for this weapon to function, but then you also need damage skills for the weapon to function, and it creates this pretty obnoxious clash, and I think they overcomplicated things to get the dual weapon gimmick out. Now, with some good enough decorations, and I'm sure they're going to be even nuttier decorations as we get into the title updates and into Master Rank and all that kind of stuff, every deco is basically going to look like a classic Monster Hunter charm, I think, at this point. And they already have some pretty decent combo decos that you can already grab in the game thus far to kind of help you out. But yeah, it always feels kind of bad when you have a weapon that really needs ballistics or focus or KO or something like and you can't get that on your armor. You have to slot that in on your weapon, and then that's going to compromise on your elemental attack, your status buildup, your crit boost, your offensive guard, and stuff like that. They did some compromising with that by making it so that the weapons now have passive skills, which is kind of cool, but that also means that some weapons are just going to be generally more valuable to others, and that also creates an issue with the Ardian weapons, in that the Ardians are just very, very valuable because they have incredibly high gem slots on them, so that kind of runs into you not particularly wanting to use the monster weapons as much if you want to play meta, but the monster weapons are much more interesting visually. I'm still generally just kind of playing the monster weapons. I really kind of don't care about the Ardians all that much. If you know me, I'm not a min-maxer, I'm not a meta player or anything like that. I kind of just make whatever I want to make, and good enough is good enough. You know, my magical kind of perfect pocket of fighting a monster should be about like 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm getting about 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm pretty much good with not giving a flying crap about the Ardian stuff. The Ardian stuff just has much more utility because of how the decos work and because of their stats. There's a very unadvisable aspect of the game where the Tempered Arcveld has a better pool of Ardian weapon rewards than every other monster in the game. It should have been the big six that have the best pool in the game, not just him. Again, myself personally, doesn't impact me that much. I don't really give a crap about the Ardian weapons. I just kind of do whatever I want to do, and I'm getting the kill times that I like because I enjoy engaging with the monsters, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. But that doesn't mean that the way things are set up I find to be ill-advised. I am of the belief that I think they should probably bring the augments back. They should probably walk back the Ardians, especially because the Ardians are just not as appealing as the general monster weapons. I think they should try to bring up the monster weapons to the point where they have that better decoration utility that the Ardians have, that they have some of the better stats that the Ardian stuff has, and just maybe kind of play around with the augment system a little bit more, give it some more customization than the other versions have had, maybe give it the ability to change around the inbuilt skills on those weapons, just in case there's a really cool weapon you want to run, but the inbuilt skill isn't particularly useful. Why in the world do you have stuff like crit draw and punishing draw on some of the lances? I have no idea, but allow me to just kind of take that crap off, please. But yeah, I'm here to engage with the monster stuff. I'm not here to engage with the Ardian stuff. I do engage with the monster weapons. I'm having more fun with them. I'm making a whole bunch of them and just seeing whatever I like and whatnot. That's what I enjoy. But yeah, that doesn't mean that the top level meta stuff doesn't have some design issues that I generally disagree with, and I think should probably be walked back, if not by the title updates, then by master rank. From what I understand, the Ardian weapons are generally not particularly well received, so hopefully the developers take that as feedback. Some other stuff. The multiplayer is definitely more cumbersome than I think it needs to be. I understand the trappings of how all of that works, though. In general, I do like the link party system. The way the link party system works is it basically is a reserved seating list. If you're in a bigger public lobby, but you have a couple of individuals that you specifically want to be playing with, and you set up a quest or whatever, then they're going to get an automatic invite, whereas the whole lobby will still have the ability to join in on whatever you're doing, but it's, like I said, it's a reserved seating list, and I kind of like that, so you can kind of pick and choose who you want priority to be playing with. The environmental link on top of that, I think, could be changed around a little bit. Again, I understand why the environmental link thing exists. It's to enter the separate instance of basically the free roaming expeditions, and it allows other players to enter that instance. What I think they might be able to do to kind of fix things so you're not doing as much menu hopping with the link party and then going into the link environment and that kind of stuff and juggling around that stuff is, I think the automation that the link party adds, I think should be brought into the link environments. So what they could probably do is add a little bit of coding to it where if you leave base camp and you are out in the world, the game will maybe automatically instigate an environment link, and then the link party will send out those invites on the same automated thing. Maybe the game is coded in such a way that that's not possible. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just kind of tossing out an idea. And the other thing that might be something worth doing is that if that player kind of crosses over that threshold and enters an environment link and does that kind of stuff and is out in the wild doing that whole ordeal, it will post that environment link as a lobby member quest that other people can then join as a normal quest, and then put like an option in the settings as to whether or not you want your environment link to be fully open just to link members, or closed completely. I think if you do that, you can kind of just trim down the menu surfing a little bit and kind of play up with the actual strengths of the link party and keep the automated reserved seating aspect intact. Those are just some ideas that I think might be able to make the process a little bit simpler on the player end. As is, I think there's some exaggeration as to how cumbersome and how complex the multiplayer system is, but it is unintuitive to initially learn, for sure. So I said all that. I focus mostly on gameplay issues because I think that's the more important stuff to focus on when you're critiquing. But do I like Wilds, and why do I like it? What I did is I set aside a really big chunk of my weekend as of recording this. It's currently Monday. So I put in about 10 to 12 hours of Monster Hunter Wilds over this weekend by myself, and I just played. And I just did whatever I naturally wanted to do. I didn't force myself to do anything. I didn't force myself to play meta or to not play meta or engage with whatever. I just played however I wanted to play and just saw what would naturally happen, and I observed what I thought in the moment. And I found that I was having a blast with the game, despite everything that I just said and believing them to be true. Why? Why did I like? Am I just too easy to please? Do I just have brand loyalty to Monster Hunter? Am I too generous with things? The answer is sometimes yes. I am usually pretty generous with stuff. Why did I like it? Why was I having fun? Why? Why am I having fun genuinely, whereas a lot of people were pretty put off for valid reasons, legitimately valid reasons? I found that for myself, subjectively, how I enjoy Monster Hunter, what I want from the franchise, what I ask of it when I play these games. Monster Hunter Wilds excelled for me on a subjective level, for my tastes. If you know how I play these games, I don't play meta, I don't rush meta, I don't play super optimally, I don't care. That's not fun for me. The challenge of Monster Hunter is a component of my enjoyment. It is not the be-all and the end-all for me. I do not play these games to maximize them to the absolute top potential of what they can do. You know, there's a contrast in me playing Wilds versus me playing Frontier, right? Where my sweet spot for a monster fight is a range of about 12 to 15 minutes for an encounter. That's where I like to be for my kill times. That means I'm taking hits, the monster's taking hits, they're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing, I'm engaging with their kit. I don't really like to cheese them out all that much. I want to engage with the battle. Like, that's what I'm here for. So in playing something like Frontier, where the monsters are very challenging because of their damage reduction on themselves, their high damage stats, the need for things like iframes and stuff like that, I can push myself very far in terms of set building and knowledge and gameplay and whatnot, and get those 12 to 15 minute clear times. In Wilds, I scale myself back. I don't play meta. I don't care about that kind of stuff. There's particular options that I don't use, like the sacred pickup and whatnot, and I get those 12 to 15 minute clear times, and I'm having fun. So whatever is kind of putting myself in that position to have that fun is what I'm gonna do. When I was playing Wilds, what my brain was naturally kind of gravitating towards was I would just open up the map and I would look at what was available and I'd go, ooh, that encounter looks like a lot of fun. A 4-star tempered Ajaracon. So I pour it over to the oil well basin and I fight the Ajaracon for 12 minutes and I kill him and I take him down and I get the rewards. And I open up the map. There's nothing too crazy looking going on here. There is there's a tempered Kamatrice with a Doshiguma multi-quest over in the plains. So I'm gonna pour over the queens, I'm gonna load into that quest, I'm gonna do that quest and get those rewards. That's done. Look what else is on the map. All right, Storm's rolling in. Raidow's on the map. Cool, I want to fight Raidow. I love fighting Raidow. Go fight Raidow. Open the map back up. There is a 5-star tempered Gormagala over in the Ice Shard Cliffs, and I warp over there, and I port over there, and I toss up an SOS flare, and I do that in multiplayer because Gormagala scares me in this game. And I was just ping-ponging back and forth, one map, other map, random encounter, bing, bong, back and forth, all over the place. Fight this guy, fight that guy, kill that guy, fight with this one, multiplayer, single player, over and over and over. And I was just having a blast, because I think the monsters are really, really good in this game in terms of, what their kits can do and all that kind of stuff. Some of the gimmicks I think are a little bit weak in terms of, like quakes and roars and wind pressure and some of their status stuff like that, and that could probably get pumped up a little bit as well with some of the number tweaks that I think could be made to this game. But in terms of just like physical movesets, really fun to engage with for me. And the other thing with this game is that, the Ardean pools being given predominantly to Arkveld is a mistake, but the decoration pools are much more generous, and you can get some generally pretty good stuff with like really early level monsters. I got a Crit Boost 3 deco like almost out the gate of getting into higher rank, which was really cool. And also there are these 3 different tiers of tickets that you can get off of the tempered monsters. There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, depending on whatever monster you can fight, and different talisman upgrades and armor upgrades and stuff like that. You need the different tickets, so that makes it so that there's value in the mid-level monsters and in the weaker monsters, so you don't have to just hyperfixate the top stuff. And whereas Arkveld has the singular best Ardean pool, the big 6 of the Apexes, Arkveld and Gore, all share the same deco pool. And I care more about the decorations than I care about the Ardean stuff, so I don't feel as penalized with that kind of thing. What I want Monster Hunter to do is give me a lot of really fun fights that I can engage with in these bursts of like 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes max. And I want it to incentivize me to fight a lot of different stuff, which the very gracious deco pools and the ticket system has allowed me to do. And the fights aren't too long, so I don't feel too bad if I'm not hyper-focusing on a bunch of stuff. And then I go out and I do like a dozen different fights or something like that, and then I just have this big, fat, fucking stockpile of stuff, and like, all right, what can I make with all this? And I make some new armor, I make some new layered armor, and I make a couple of weapons and whatnot. It's like, all right, I kind of need to focus on this, so I gotta get like the tier 3 tickets. Like, there's a tempered Apex somewhere. I'll go do that one, and I'll go snag one, get 2 tickets off of that, and that's like halfway towards finishing off a talisman or something like that. I really enjoyed Sunbreak's endgame because it was a system where it rewarded you for just having a fuck ton of stuff. And then you take all that stuff and you throw it in a vat and you get crap back. That's how the augment system works for the most part, barring a couple of specific materials. And that's how the charms worked for the most part, barring a couple of specific materials. You just take a whole bunch of shit and you throw it in a melting pot and you get cool stuff back. Wilds doesn't quite have that, again, with the Ardean stuff. And so I think Sunbreak still pulls ahead in that capacity. But Wilds, I have found, in my personal estimation, to be the second best Monster Hunter game at not penalizing me and encouraging me to just go engage with a whole bunch of monsters and to just play the game and enjoy it and just kind of sink into it and have fun. Some people come to Monster Hunter for the challenge. This game underserves those people who are coming to it for the challenge. I agree with that. I can point out the issues in that department. I think they should fix that kind of stuff. I do. I think that the people who come here for the challenges, the top level players, though the game shouldn't cater to them, I do think that they should have a game that still allows them to have their fun. My fun is what I think Wilds does almost the best in the franchise is just, here's a randomly generated quest out there. 2 monsters. This one's tempered, this one's not. Go do that. Then you get this big fat reward pile. You get a whole bunch of stuff. Now there's that thing and there's that thing. And you go into this map and that monster and this monster. And that's just what I naturally did without having any plan, without having any preconceived mission or anything like that. Barring some stuff I'm kind of grinding for just to make more gear. But I didn't have a plan. I just played the way I wanted to play and just enjoyed the game. And for my personal tastes, I think that is where Wilds excels. I think it is really good at encouraging you to just go fight because of the generous decorations, because of how the ticket system works, because of how the layered armor works. If you want to play it like the tip top levels, you're going to be underserved, I think, for sure. But that's not me. It's never been me. So that, I think, is where Wilds does things very, very well. That is what I hope it continues to do particularly well. I hope it can look at Sunbreak as a bit of a model and go with kind of the VAT reward endgame system that game has, because I find that it is one of my favorites, and it is a game that penalizes me probably the least for going out and hunting whatever the hell I want. This is another game that just kind of allows me to go hunt whatever the hell I want, and I really enjoy it for that. Once I kind of just realized that, I started to really love the game. I'm finding that I've been having my most fun with the title now that everything is unlocked and I have some decent sets in this point of around 70 hours, 80 hours, 90 hours, because now I'm capable of basically just going out and beating pretty much anything in the game if I want to within some reasonable time, but I'm still not slaughtering anything just because I'm not going to. And I think changes can be made with wound buildup, with status buildup, with health pools, with monster gimmicks, making their stuff a little bit stronger, making their damage a little bit stronger, making them a little bit healthier, decreasing the stagger lock potential, and all that kind of stuff. So make it that the people who do get that thrill from the challenge and really want a game that pushes them to use every tool at their disposal, I think that should be an eventual destination. Do I think that's probably where Master Rank is going to go? Sure. Do I think that Wilds, out of every Monster Hunter game, drops that ball the hardest? Rise is still up there as very easy, but it doesn't have the chain flinching. It's really, get the chain flinching out of there, and I'm gonna have borderline no issue with this game that I can't overlook via personal preference. So that's how I'm feeling about it. That is subjectively what I feel about it, objectively what I feel about it, how I think certain systems are kind of clashing with what I think Monster Hunter kind of wants to do. There's definitely a very weak launch here, but the game I think is very good at rewarding you for going out and doing whatever the hell you want and just kind of randomly enjoying the game at a very leisurely pace and just kind of being soaked in it and enjoying it. If you want to enjoy the game, I think the game is very good at it. If you want to be challenged by the game, I don't think it is quite as good at it. And again, that's just going to come down to who you are. I don't think that there is a wrong way to enjoy Monster Hunter. I think this game just has its failings for a particular demographic of the fan base. And I want those fans to have the fun that they want to have. And I think that Wilds can be tweaked and trimmed and pushed, and I feel like a lot of it is a lot of just numerical cranking and retooling to put this game in a particularly good space. But subjectively, I can't not like it, as I've found myself to be in a Monster Hunter game that wants me to do the things that I want to do in a Monster Hunter game. And I have a lot of appreciation for that. And yeah, there's some design choices that I think are objectionable. There are some things where I feel like we've kind of gone backwards a little bit. I think we've kind of overcomplicated things a little bit. There's stuff like the weapon swapping and the seamless environments swapping and the weather switching, which I think is generally really just kinda spectacle fluff that really doesn't serve the purpose that I think the developers thought they were going to get out of it. And a lot of those are notable issues with the game, for sure. And I think some of those fluffy things like that are impacting the performance even worse than it could be. There's a lot of things going against the PC performance, unfortunately. And that is going to need a lot of ironing and a lot of work before that's in a decent state. But I have found that I've enjoyed it more and more the more I've played it. The more I've kind of got into the free roam aspect of the game and just the ability to just free range hunt as I please. This game is very well tailored for what I want out of this game. I think Wilds will continue to be tailored towards the things that I want out of Monster Hunter. Simultaneously, I think it can also push itself to be a game that the speedrunners and the hardcores and the people who want to be pushed to use their entire toolkit can enjoy, but it's going to take a good deal of number tweaking. Are the title updates going to get us there? Hopefully. Is the end of the Master Rank expansion and its title updates going to get us there? Very likely. Yeah, I just think that this is probably the weakest launch of a Monster Hunter game for a Monster Hunter game that I think is very enjoyable. That's kind of where I'm at. It's some of my favorite fights. It's some of my favorite combat. I like the visceralness. I like the intelligence behind it. I like the movement. I like the energy. I like the idea of the dynamics of the wounds. I wish the closers didn't exist. If you were to bring them back, just get rid of that system entirely for Monster Hunter 7, and I think you probably have a pretty good system there. But yeah, as someone who plays these games to enjoy them, not necessarily to be good at them, I think this is a particularly stellar game for my personal tastes. And I think for now, that's gonna be it. So, hope you enjoyed this. This was all entirely off the dome. I've been talking for an hour and a half. I'm going to hate myself editing this. I'm going to want to rip my own head off. Editing Connor is going to want to brutally kill recording Connor. But, yeah. Monster Hunter Wilds. I think it is gonna be something excellent. It is kind of the way that I'm looking at it. A lot of the groundwork, I think, is there. It's a lot of number tweaking, I think, for the most part, and then a couple of issues that are kind of built in that I think you can, at the very least, mitigate and kind of get around and tweak around and stuff like that. But there's some inbuilt stuff into this game that I think is not great, that I hope they revert in the next game or just try to downplay as much as possible going forwards. There's some stuff I object to. But in terms of what I want a Monster Hunter game to do for me, and create an experience where I'm out hunting, whatever I want, doing whatever I want, just going and enjoying random encounters and getting a whole big stockpile of parts and making a whole bunch of stuff for the sake of making a whole bunch of stuff. I think it's one of the better Monster Hunter games at that aspect. And I wish all the best for this game. Honestly, you know, I think it is probably one of these series' weakest launches, and I think it is also one of these series' highest potentials. So all the best to Wilds, honestly. I hope it gets more challenging. I hope they're able to mitigate their issues. I hope that they're able to navigate some of their design issues. I hope they learn the right lessons. I hope that the optimization gets better. I hope that the performance gets better and all that kind of stuff, and that this game really kind of comes into being what it properly should be, because the groundwork for something exceptional is absolutely there. And I hope that Wilds gets to a point where everyone can enjoy this game as much as I am. And that, I think, is gonna just about do it. This has been CR-Volcanic, or Connor. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Stromlin, Skyryu, Sir Newt Newt, Shaggy Grizzly, Sam Richley, Psychotic Gesture, P-Berry, Nihilus Kymrax, Ketz, Datboy Doin Da Ding, Certified Rajang Hater, Sir SS Jacob, Pecco Plush, I Think I Stole Your Sandwich, and Call Sign Shadow. Thank you very much, everyone.